Today on RoxomTV News, Venezuela says it freed hundreds of political prisoners, but human rights groups say the math doesn't add up. Plus, Europe is coming after Elon Musk's XAI, calling Grok's latest scandal unlawful and appalling. But in Minneapolis, a federal shooting is triggering court battles, protests, and even cracks inside Trump's own party. All that and more right now on today's show. Let's get into it. Good morning and welcome to RoxomTV News. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. It is Monday and we are shooting out of our mobile office space this morning. So we are in our mobile studio here and we're going to get into it. Our first story hasn't loaded yet, so I'm going to have the guys get that on the prompter. So we're going to dive right into the second story of this morning. And this one's starting in Abu Dhabi, but it stretches from the negotiating table in the Middle East all the way to bomb shelters in Ukraine and energy offices across Europe. Right now, U.S. brokered peace talks between Ukraine and Russia have wrapped up in Abu Dhabi without any real breakthrough, even though both sides say they're willing to meet again next weekend. And that's happening while Russian airstrikes are still hitting Ukrainian cities, knocking out power to more than 1 million people over the weekend and reminding everyone just how fragile this diplomatic effort really is. U.S. officials describe the talks as constructive, which usually means that people were polite, professional, and serious, even if nobody actually agreed on much. Now, Ukraine's foreign minister says that Russia is acting cynically, arguing that it's hard to negotiate peace while missiles are still falling on civilian neighborhoods. Now, from Ukraine's perspective, those attacks are not only hurting civilians, they're also damaging trust in the entire peace process. Now, at the center of these talks are two issues that have been blocking progress for months now: territory and long-term security guarantees. President Volodymyr Zelensky says a U.S.-backed security agreement is now fully drafted and ready to be signed, which would give Ukraine direct American support, though it still needs approval from both countries' parliaments. Russia, meanwhile, continues to insist that Ukraine give up parts of its eastern region, something Kiev has repeatedly rejected. So the United States is trying to mediate between two positions that remain very far apart on basic principles. At the same time, Europe is increasing economic pressure on Moscow. The European Union has now approved a full ban on Russian gas imports, cutting off liquefied gas by 2026 and pipeline gas by 2027. Now, companies that violate the rules could face fines worth billions of dollars. Hungary and Slovakia opposed the ban, arguing it would hurt their economies, but they were ultimately outvoted. Now, the broader goal is to limit the money flowing into Russia's wartime economy. Now, why this matters for those of you watching at home is that this war continues to affect global energy prices, political alliances, and security arrangements that eventually touch everything from utility bills to foreign policy decisions. And right now, peace is still being discussed seriously, but it is still very far from being secured. All right, joining me to talk about this story and others this morning, we have the man who's got the biggest beats out there, Stephen Orr. Stephen, happy Monday. Thank you for joining us in our mobile studio here at RoxomTV News. Always great to see you. How are you?
I'm good, Hank. Hope you guys are staying warm and this as the weather pops through the United States. But you're absolutely right. Ukraine and Russia still can't seem to get along, right? You hear it from Vladimir Putin blaming Zelensky, and Zelensky now blaming Putin for almost everything now. And you look at it from the perspective of NATO, they want to get a peace deal done, and Trump is now saying, "Hey, look, enough's enough," But he's now blaming Zelensky and not Putin. So maybe the theory and the theme here is changing here, but one thing is definitely still happening is people are dying. Drones are still moving across and bombs are still being dropped as the peace process is going on. Usually during this time, if you're going to talk about peace, you both got to stop killing each other, and that's not happening. So I don't think peace is one of the things that's on their forefront right now. You look at it from the perspective of a cold front in Europe, and when the spigot gets turned off in Europe from Russia, that's that's a problem. And we know that Russia right now is concerned about pricing because they're concerned about paying for this war, and they've been dumping their gold, yet gold prices are still pushing higher, yet silver is pushing higher. So the markets in the world seem to be out of flux right now, especially in that part of the world. So right now, I'm concerned about two things in this situation. Is a peace deal really going to happen? And are both sides going to come to the docket and say, okay, look, we got to get something done here?
Yeah, you're right. If we keep hearing, I wasn't super optimistic about, we were talked about these last week, because we keep hearing these talks are quote unquote constructive, but nothing really is seeming to actually change on the ground. So my question for you, Stephen, is at what point do negotiations like this become more about optics than actual peace? Because right now it kind of feels like Trump's just playing the blame game to get it off his own table.
It reminds me of several times in history where both says, "Hey, we're trying to get a peace agreement," and nothing happened. And then the first one was World War One, the second was World War Two.
Yikes.
Look, we got to be concerned here because this is about NATO now being involved. We have a Greenland issue now where Russia is also stepping foot trying to play poker here. And I'm hearing questions marks about, oh, well, Trump's playing 4D chess. There's a problem here, and that problem is we need to hear exactly what the peace deal is, and we need to see them both come to the physical table, shaking hands, and neither one's doing that. Trump just had a nice chat with Tim Walz and said he's a nice guy, right? They had a good conversation. Look, if you got a problem, go talk it out, go shake hands, make a phone call, do something. And we're not seeing that here. So the continuation of a peace deal talks is nothing but that, but bluster and talk. So that, I think that's why you're seeing precious metal pushing higher here.
Yeah. And you mentioned we're just seeing talks, but it makes me wonder how realistic is any kind of deal, because Russia is still bombing cities while these talks are actually happening. So my question for you, Stephen, is does that kind of tell you that maybe Russia isn't really feeling the real pressure yet? Or is that just kind of how modern diplomacy works now? Talks are in session, but bombs are still in the air?
Yeah, no, totally. That's not how diplomacy works. And I work in the State Department. I can tell you that right now. Look, let's be real simple about this. Neville Chamberlain was the let's say the head of diplomacy for the UK when World War II was going on, and Neville Chamberlain telling the world, "Don't worry, Hitler's a good guy. He'll stop at this country and he'll stop at that country." And Hitler was still dropping bombs, and Hitler was still moving the Blitzkrieg. Unless Putin stops the bombing, unless Zelensky stops the fighting, it's not going to stop. In fact, it could expand very quickly as we see parts of the other parts of the world really kick off. And it's look here and don't look here, look here and don't look here. That is what they're seeing, and that's why the markets are doing what they're doing right now.
Yeah. So right now, another interesting development that we saw this morning, Stephen, is that the EU is cutting off Russian gas. It seems like a big move, especially knowing, but it's going to hurt some European economies. So my question for you is, do you see this as maybe a real turning point here, or is this more just kind of symbolic pressure? What's your beat on that?
You're absolutely right, Hank. It's symbolic pressure because, quite frankly, Europe does not live without liquefied natural gas. It needs Russian gas. The lines are in place. Everything is there. And there's no really other place to get liquefied LNG. And the only place they can get it now is the United States or a few other places where we send LNG. But the fastest way to get it there is by Russian oil and Russian gas, which they are one of the largest owners of nat gas. Hank, it's a big question mark here. If they set the timeline far enough, which they did in advance, then they can pull that off and say, okay, no, we were just kidding. It could be the taco trade for the European Union.
Yeah.
Look, I don't think that's going to be the case. Ukraine and Russia need to get together here. They need to finish this up, the fighting. Look, if Ukraine has to give up some land so that Putin saves face, okay, it's better than dead people. It's better than giving up some land for what? A little bit of ports. I understand the contingency here, and yes, includes a nuclear facility, but at the same time, we need less dead people. We need less drones killing each other before this really breaks out into an all-out war.
Yeah, absolutely. And we both know that the ramifications for this go far beyond just the impact of bodies on the ground in Russia and Ukraine. And one of the things I always love about having you on the show, Big Beat, is I love getting the global markets perspective and how this is making the markets react right now. So my question for you is, how does this ongoing certainty in the Ukraine, we've seen it for several years now, still matter compared to other crises in the world in terms of a market reaction? I mean, we've got a lot going on between Venezuela, Greenland, what's happening in Minnesota and the United States. How big of an impact is the Ukraine situation on the markets amid all of the global chaos we're currently seeing?
Well, you said it personally right there with the nat gas issue, but when you look at it from a bigger perspective and you say the word BRICS out loud again, it's Brazil, Russia. You start to say the I, the C, and the S in that situation with China now, and India. That's a massive area that they've come together, right? And when I look at it from a bigger perspective of world politics, it seems that the world's splitting apart, and they're testing those. It's like hitting an area and seeing where the place breaks apart. And right now, I always call it the Fifth Fleet diplomacy. Where is the Fifth Fleet? And it's sitting out inside the Middle East with Iran. So United States really isn't focused on Russia and Ukraine. They're really focused on other hotspots of the area. But Venezuela, as you just said, and the Middle East. So even our own eyes of this country is actually turning away from Ukraine and Russia. I remember during the campaign where Trump said, I can end this war in one day. It's been over a year now. So they're not concerned about this area as much now as they are the Fifth Fleet. And that Fifth Fleet is sitting off the coast now. The USS Abraham Lincoln is now sitting off the coast of Iran. And Iran is now saying death to the United States. Where you sow the wind, you get the whirlwind, is now on almost every corner now in Tehran, saying to them that we will destroy. The head general now in Iran for the Ayatollah is now saying we will hit every embassy and hotspot now with the United States in the Middle East. That's not just normal talk. That's not normal way of saying things that we're going to create peace. So you get back to when you talk about Russia and Ukraine, if our focus isn't squarely on Ukraine and Russia, it's pulled somewhere else, that gives Russia and Putin another chance. You heard from Russia's top general himself saying that we will continue the fight, we will continue to push, and we will continue the drone war. So no, I don't think peace is on the agenda right now for either side.
Yeah, it kind of seems to be the way the world is going right now. A lot of chaos, whether it's in the Middle East or back here at home. And that actually brings us to our next story that I want to chat about here in just a second, Big B. So I want to go back to Minneapolis right now. As over the weekend, a federal immigration operation in the city turned deadly when agents shot and killed 37-year-old ICU nurse Alex Jeffrey Preddy. And since then, the fallout has spread from city halls to courtrooms to Capitol Hill. Now, a federal judge is weighing whether to temporarily halt the Trump administration's immigration crackdown in Minnesota after Minneapolis and St. Paul formally asked the court to pause what they describe as a massive and disproportionate deployment of federal agents. City leaders say this 3,000 agent operation crosses a line and violates state sovereignty, while the administration insists it is necessary and has dismissed the request as being unreasonable. Now, President Trump has sent border czar Tom Homan to the state, signaling that the White House intends to remain closely involved. Now, to understand why this has escalated so quickly, it helps to look at what happened on the ground. Now, according to federal authorities, agents were conducting an enforcement sweep when they encountered Preddy. Several videos from the scene show Preddy holding what appears to be a phone and attempting to help a woman who had been pushed to the ground by ICE agents. Officials initially said he approached officers while holding a gun and posed a threat. Here is what witnesses recorded at the scene. Do we have a video here? Let's take a look.
People, the fuck is wrong with you? Honestly.
Now, other videos appear to show one of the federal officers taking the gun away from Preddy just before the fatal shooting. Federal authorities later acknowledged that he was legally carrying a licensed handgun. However, analysts reviewing the footage of the shooting say he appears to have been disarmed before he was shot. Now, the gap between official statements and what people can see on video has driven much of the public reaction we've been seeing. The Minnesota police chief and Governor Tim Walz both condemned the killing and called for a full state-led investigation. They also raised concerns after federal authorities initially blocked local police from accessing the scene, even though officers had valid search warrants. Governor Walz is urging Americans to pay close attention to what is happening currently in Minnesota, and here is what he actually had to say. Take a listen.
You're allowed to decide at any point that you're not with this anymore. If you voted for this administration, heck, even if you thought Operation Metro Surge was a good idea, sounded like the thing to do a month ago, you're still allowed to look at what's happening here in Minnesota and say, this isn't what I voted for and this isn't what I want. So my question is, what's the plan, Donald Trump? What is the plan?
Now, since the shooting, protests have spread across Minneapolis and beyond, with people gathering for vigils and memorials despite freezing temperatures. Community leaders say these demonstrations reflect deeper concerns about federal enforcement in residential neighborhoods. But at the same time, major business leaders in Minnesota have stepped in. 60 of the state's largest companies, including Target, 3M, United Health, and U.S. Bancorp, released a joint statement calling for de-escalation and warning that prolonged unrest could harm the state's economy. Now, behind the scenes, state officials have begun pursuing multiple legal avenues. After being denied access to the scene, Minnesota authorities filed a lawsuit accusing federal agencies of obstructing justice and mishandling evidence. A federal judge has since ordered the Department of Homeland Security to preserve all materials related to the shooting and to refrain from altering or destroying evidence. State and county prosecutors have also confirmed that they will continue their own investigation alongside federal reviews, underscoring a growing struggle over jurisdiction and accountability. Meanwhile, even within President Trump's own party, there are signs of discomfort. Some Republican lawmakers are urging the administration to reconsider the scale of the operation. Here are some of those very comments. Listen in.
Another individual is dead at the hands of Border Patrol. Let's be clear. We do not know if there was any pushback from this individual who was armed. We do not have evidence that he was waving a gun, doing anything to threaten Border Patrol. He had his phone and he was shooting. He was viewing and recording the incident. That's what he was doing, recording the incident. Mm-hmm. What is your reaction? And you are an elected official. What can you do about it?
And if I were President Trump, I would almost think about, okay, if the mayor and the governor are going to put our ICE officials in harm's way, and there's a chance of losing more, innocent lives or whatever, then maybe go to another city and let the people of Minneapolis decide, do we want to continue to have all of these illegals? Are we going to allow our governor, attorney general, and mayor to get away with this? And I think the people of Minnesota would rebel against their leadership, because it's very clear that a majority of Americans want the criminal illegals apprehended, and that's what ICE is trying to do.
Now, recent Reuters polling shows that nearly 40% of Trump's Republican supporters now say minimizing harm should take priority, even if it leads to fewer immigration arrests. That represents a notable shift in tone, and Freddie's death also comes amid a broader pattern of federal enforcement incidents in Minneapolis, including at least 2 other shootings this month under what authorities call Operation Metro Surge. Critics say these operations resemble an occupation and raise serious concerns about proportionality. They also point to reduced transparency. Just last June, the administration cut funding for ICE's body camera program and placed oversight staff on leave, limiting the availability of official footage and investigative capacity. Now, as a result, much of the public has relied on cell phone videos to understand what actually happened. President Trump told the Wall Street Journal that he is reviewing the incident and said he did not like anyone going to protests with a loaded gun. He also added that he does not like any shooting and suggested he may eventually withdraw agents from Minneapolis, while praising their work so far. Now, for many within the administration, the central issue here has been Freddie's decision to carry a 9mm handgun. But major gun rights organizations have rejected that framing. Groups like the NRA and Gun Owners of America say lawful gun ownership should not be blamed for the shooting and should not be subpoenaed. Now, NRA spokesperson Taylor Rhodes said in part, the Constitution isn't a light switch you flip when the government gets nervous. Disarming lawful citizens doesn't protect ICE or anyone else. He also told the Wall Street Journal that the footage reflects poorly on the agents involved. For conservative leaders, this has created an uncomfortable dilemma because for years, gun rights advocates have defended armed protesters across the political spectrum. Now, many say they're unwilling to abandon that principle even when it conflicts with the administration's narrative. They argue that lawful possession alone should never trigger lethal force, and the episode highlights a broader political risk for the White House as immigration enforcement priorities now collide with longstanding support for expansive gun rights. And the political fallout is now spreading to Capitol Hill. Senate Democrats say they will not support Homeland Security funding unless new limits and oversight are added, and that raises the risk of partial government shutdown as early as next week. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has urged Republicans to separate the Department of Homeland Security funding from the broader budget and renegotiate enforcement provisions. Now, Democrats are demanding tighter accountability and stronger congressional oversight. In fact, several lawmakers who previously avoided shutdown threats now say they can no longer support current policies. And Republicans have largely defended the administration, but some have called for hearings and joint investigations. House Democrats are pushing for tougher conditions, including withdrawing agents and banning masks during operations. With Republicans controlling the Senate, Democrats face a difficult path forward. And Reuters reports that Preddy's death is part of a wider surge in fatalities linked to immigration enforcement. At least 5 federal shootings occurred in January alone. At least 6 immigrants also died in detention centers this month. Roughly 3,000 agents again have been deployed in Minneapolis, and many detainees nationwide were arrested for civil violations rather than serious crimes. Immigration detention has reached record levels with about 69,000 people currently held. Nearly half have no criminal charge or conviction. And advocates say overcrowding and strained medical services have created dangerous conditions. And video reviewed by Reuters in several cases has raised questions about official accounts fueling protests and calls for independent investigations. And when it comes to holding the ICE agents accountable, the path to accountability is complicated. Under state and federal law, deadly force is permitted only when necessary to prevent serious harm. DHS maintains that agents acted in self-defense in both recent shootings. Local officials, however, dispute that conclusion. Because the agents were acting in the course of official duties, they enjoy broad legal immunity. State prosecutions are difficult, and federal civil rights cases are rare and hard to prove. Families may pursue some civil lawsuits, but those cases face some major procedural limits. The result is a system in which investigations can stretch on for months while criminal accountability remains difficult to secure. And here's my quick take on this, all right? If the video was accurate, and it looks like it is, then this shooting never, ever should have happened. Full stop. A man holding a phone trying to help someone who just got shoved to the ground should not end up dead, even if he legally owns a gun. That's not anti-law enforcement, that's just common sense. If carrying a licensed firearm automatically makes you a lethal threat, then the Second Amendment doesn't really mean much anymore, does it? And gun rights only exist on paper. And that should bother conservatives just as much as liberals. At the same time, if you support tough immigration enforcement, you should also be honest about something. Sending 3,000 federal agents into civilian neighborhoods was always going to end badly. You don't flood residential streets with heavily armed officers and expect nothing to go wrong. That's just not realistic. That's wishful thinking. This feels like a policy that was designed in Washington, approved in meetings, and never fully thought through in real life. And when it collided with real people and real neighborhoods, the result was predictable. Now everyone is arguing about politics, but the reality is one man is dead, his family is devastated, and no one has clearly explained why deadly force was necessary. The government wants aggressive enforcement, fine, own it. But then it also has to own the consequences when things go wrong. And right now, it feels like everyone is trying to dodge the responsibility instead. This doesn't mean every agent is bad. It means this operation was reckless. And until leaders admit this, this won't be the last story like this. And that's the part people should be paying attention to. We're bringing Stephen in. Stephen, what are your initial thoughts on the most recent happening we saw here in Minnesota? I would love to get your thoughts.
You know, we had this conversation last week, Hank, the same situation, and you and I talked about that. This could have been easily avoided. You don't bring dynamite to a fire, right? You just don't do that. And two wrongs do not make a right. The guy should not have brought a gun to a peaceful protest. And why is it that many ICE agents in one little area going over that? It's just not right. And then on top of that, the president now sends the border czar to a place that's not on the border. There's a problem here. There's a look, and we talk about it from the one guy who gets shot. He wasn't shot once without a gun in his hands. And a nurse now is also dead as well. This is wrong on so many levels. I can't even begin to explain it. And I'm a gun owner. This is absolutely ridiculous. The NRA is wrong. The president's wrong. Minnesota's wrong. The governor's wrong. Everybody's wrong. This should not, a peaceful protest should have happened if that's how they feel about it. But why is all this happening? As I always tell people, it's not when one wrong happens, it's when another wrong happens, another wrong happens, another wrong happens. It exacerbates. And that's what's happened. A powder keg has been lit off. And there's absolutely no reason for this whatsoever. And people should not be dead over this. We understand, and I believe that criminals should be kicked out of the country. If you hear, look, we are the greatest country in the world for that very reason. But if you commit crimes, then you're out the door you go. But if you're a peaceful, law-abiding, you're on your path, the green card, or you're on the journey, of which the president has already said doesn't count anymore, there's a problem here. So people are not happy on both sides. The president's approval rating is way low. They know November is coming, and I'm telling you right now, a massive blue wave for the Democrat Party is coming. If they don't believe it, then why is things happening the way that they are? So they do know that, and it looks like the House is going to go Democrat, and so they're moving very quickly to saying, okay, I'm very tough on crime. I'm doing this in Minnesota because there are problems. We talked about this last week about Somalians in Minnesota. So I understand both sides are just to blame for this, and Tim Walz is not helping. He's adding to the flame, and yet the president and Tim Walz just had a nice quote conversation. They're both good guys. What is going on? Pull those people out of there. They don't need they don't need that many of the National Guard, and they don't need the ICE troops. Those ICE people are not trained.
No. This
is a federal agency that had just hired hundreds of thousands of people, it felt like, to go into a place that's this small. Come on. We don't need that. It should be precision strikes, getting the bad guys out. They know who they are. So go after them. Don't go after this average person. So I'm very disappointed in the way this is all handled on all sides. Both sides.
Yeah. There's a ton of things wrong with this. Like you mentioned, a completely disproportionate response, 3,000 federal troops that lack the proper training, and there's no accountability here. With everybody covering their face, it pretty much gives them full reign to do whatever they want completely unchecked. I'd be really curious to see how this would be playing out if ICE agents were mandated to have their faces available for the public to see. I got a feeling people would be acting a lot differently in front of people's iPhone cameras if we could actually see who was doing these things in real time, but they're just able to, cover up their faces, and it's just running wild out there. And this particular instance brings up a really interesting thing right here, right? Because we're seeing gun rights groups now breaking with Trump on this particular issue, which almost never happens. And because Trump came out, I believe, and he said, like, if you bring a gun to one of these, like, that's kind of grounds enough, but that pretty much renders the Second Amendment completely useless. So my question for you, Big Beat, is, do you think that this case has the potential to reshape how conservatives talk about policing, gun ownership going forward? Because this is a really unusual spot. We're seeing specifically the right side of the island with this right now. What are your thoughts on this currently?
When you look at history and you look at peaceful, quote, protests, I have to harken back to times like Kent State, right? Where students were protesting, and you send the National Guard in there. There's no reason to send that National Guard in there. It created a massive issue, right? When you look at the next level of this, history tells us that when you do these kind of things, someone's going to get hurt and someone's going to die. And this is pathetic. And the NRA, I believe it or right, I have to say it, they're absolutely right. You can't have it both ways. If you say one way or the other way, Mr. President, then explain it. You didn't explain it to me. NRA, they have their gun rights. They understand their gun rights, and that's what they lobby. So they had to stick to their quote, quote, pun intended guns. But when you look at the other side of this, why are you bringing National Guard into this? Why are you bringing ICE into this? Why? Next thing is federal troops coming into Minnesota. We have to understand this is Minnesota, folks. This isn't like a high-class Ukraine, Venezuela issue here. We're using troops on our own people.
Yeah.
The Constitution was written for this very reason. The Second Amendment was written for this reason. So the president was wrong on this side again. And you know what? I side on the president when it comes to gun ownership. I side on that. But this is wrong. I mean, this is wrong on so many levels. Things shouldn't happen this way. And now even Republicans, even very, very strong MAGAs are even now saying that, you know what, you're even wrong on this side. So I'm not really sure what's going on here. I honestly, that's about as far as I can take it because I can't understand a situation that's being played from both sides. It's do as I say, not as I do. And that's not a way to run a country.
Yeah, no, this is just out of control. And I want to see some real accountability here. We're hearing the president come out and he's like, it's really sad these people got shot, but that's just not enough. We're seeing our own citizens being killed.
He caused it. Let's be honest about this. He caused this. He's the one that sent the troops in there. There was no reason for it. He doubled down on the ICE troops. He doubled down on what was going on there, and people didn't like it. Minnesota didn't like it. Minnesotans themselves did not like it, and they're protesting. And this is your own country, this is a state.
Yeah, it's out of control. You never expected federal troops to be used against your own people, but that's quite literally what we're seeing right now. It's not a good look for the administration. It's not a good look for us as a country. It's not a good look for anybody.
He can fix this very quickly. And he made a good point. He made a phone call to Tim Walz and said, well, they had a good conversation according to both of them. Mm-hmm. So fix it. I hate to paraphrase the SNL, but fix it. Here's how you fix it. You de-escalate the situation. Take the troops out. Let them handle it on their own if that's what they want. The governor is there for a reason. If he needs the National Guard, he can do that. If he needs help from the president, he can ask for that. De-escalate the situation before more people die.
Absolutely. Call your representatives out there, guys. We all have to band in this together because this is out of control, and it takes every one of us to help, move past this craziness because this is just out of control. I'm actually going to call my representative right now as we're taking a quick break. But when we're back, we're going to be jamming about our top Bitcoin story of the hour. So stay tuned. More Roxom TV news coming your way right after this quick commercial break. Some TV news. It's time for our Bitcoin story of the hour. It's taking place in Colombia. Inside boardrooms that normally deal with pensions, spreadsheets, and 30-year retirement plans, something unexpected is now being discussed. And that thing is Bitcoin. You see, Colombia's second largest pension fund, AFP Protección, is preparing to offer Bitcoin exposure to select clients, marking another sign that Bitcoin is moving deeper into long-term institutional finance. And this is not some speculative experiment either. This is a calculated move by one of the country's most important asset managers. The initiative was confirmed by Juan David Carrera, the president of Protección, in an interview with Valora Analytic. Now, he explained that access will be limited and handled through a personalized advisory process designed to evaluate each investor's risk profile. Only clients who meet specific criteria will be allowed to allocate a portion of their portfolios into Bitcoin. Now, Correa says the central idea here is diversification. He argues that qualified clients will have the option to place a small percentage of their retirement savings into Bitcoin if it fits their long-term strategy. Or in other words, this is being treated as a portfolio tool, not a casino bet, not a hype trade, as Protection's move follows a similar step by another major Colombian fund, Scandia, which began offering Bitcoin exposure last year. Now, with this launch, Protección becomes the second major pension administrator in the country to enter into the Bitcoin space. And listen, that matters because pension funds move slowly. They are conservative by their very design. And when they start opening doors, they rarely close them again. So zooming out, Colombia has become one of Latin America's most active Bitcoin markets. At the same time, regulators have been formalizing reporting and oversight rules. And that combination signals that Bitcoin is increasingly being treated as a permanent financial infrastructure. Now, why this should matter to those of you at home is that retirement capital tends to follow global trends. And when pension systems start testing Bitcoin, it suggests the asset is moving from alternative toward institutional standard. We're bringing in Big Beat for this one. Steven, when a conservative pension fund starts offering Bitcoin, how big of a signal is this for institutional adoption? It seems like a big deal to me. What are your thoughts?
You said it exactly right. It's adoption. It's the flip of the switch. When you talk about crypto in 2014, it was on the fringes. 2026 is no longer on the fringes. The adoption rate is speeding up. You go from Jamie Dimon saying, I will fire anybody who owns Bitcoin on my staff, to his daughter having it, to now being one of the largest owners of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Adoption is flying faster. And what you're seeing now is as crypto regulations around the world are starting to pick up, that's making institutions and banks feel more comfortable. So in that comfortability of Bitcoin adoption, major pension funds can say, okay, I will accept it as long as it's not the main thing that you use, right? If you stocks, obviously, and options and bonds and things that normally go into your 401k or your pension plans. Okay. I heard Ray Dalio last year in Davos tell me personally when I asked him, hey, how much should be in gold and Bitcoin? He said 10%. That's a change over the last decade of how much should be in there. And this year he was even more adamant on Bitcoin, right? That is a physical and mental change amongst the top level institutional holders of any asset class, and that's changing. So we know that. And as of a few weeks ago, we heard the New York Stock Exchange talking about, hey, we're going to have 24/7 trading and we're going to be tokenized with Chainlink, of which I've been buying lots of Chainlink lately. I will tell you this much, that adoption, banks are looking at it. Countries, Federal Reserves around the world are saying, okay, well, the New York Stock Exchange, if Ray Dalio and Jamie Dimon are buying it, maybe I should too. And so that's what you're seeing. And if you're seeing Latin America, you got to think of Brazil, you got to think Colombia, you got to think of Peru, major factors, right? Peru being a major owner of silver, Mexico being a major owner of silver. You saw in that correlation right now between Bitcoin and metals. So that adoption right now is saying, okay, well, if I have silver in my 401k and I have Bitcoin in my 401k, all right, all of a sudden that major adoption is happening. So I love this move and I expect more dominoes to fall, more countries to fall. I expect Bitcoin adoption to speed up, not slow down.
Yeah, absolutely. You and I both see that as the way the world is moving right now. What I really loved particularly about this was that they're framing this as diversification, not speculation. So do you think that argument is finally winning in institutional finance? Or the big banks and the institutions finally realizing that this isn't a speculative play, that this is a long-term diversification play that's here to stay? Is that kind of what you're seeing in the markets right now, Stephen?
You know, Hank, you and I have long arms. We'll hug the Colombia too, right? I mean, look, welcome to the fold. Did Colombia just get orange pilled? I think so, right?
Yeah.
Let's orange pill a few more countries, right? It's not about adoption. It's not about regulation. It's about acceptance. And if they're going to accept it, then the adoption comes and then the regulation comes. Regulation is usually the last thing. The governments are the slowest thing on the planet, even slower than the Federal Reserves. So we love this, right? Welcome aboard. But we're going to say welcome aboard to more countries. Colombia is a major exporter. We know that. And we know that Venezuela is now going to be using tokenization for their oil too, looks like. And Colombia is a part of that narrative, and Brazil is part of that narrative. Look, if the United States, if we're starting to quote sell America and dump the dollars, we got to go somewhere. Where are they going to go? They're going to go back to oil? I don't think so. So they're going into crypto. So here we go, and we'll welcome you with open arms as the diversification, as they're now calling it, happens, and we know that, right? So welcome aboard.
Yeah, once that retirement money starts flowing into Bitcoin, I got a feeling that's something that likely isn't going to be reversing anytime soon, if at all. So this is a one-way street, and I'm excited to see the pension plans get involved in it. It's going to be good for all of us, and the only thing better than that is you coming on our show every Monday, Big B. Always an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for lending your insight and expertise with us as always, and for putting up with some of the shenanigans as we do our first day in our mobile studio for the week.
It's one of the cool things about this the way that we interact, right? That RoxomTV and Quasar Markets is because we're trying to bring the news to them in a way that is normalized and not theorized and not fictionalized. We want to bring it to them in a way that brings the real news story and how we as normal people are reacting, and not letting quote the mainstream media tell us how we should act and feel and think. So I really appreciate this.
Oh, and I appreciate you, Big Beat. And for those of you out there, if you're looking to figure out how all this info actually impacts the market, make sure you check out Steven's amazing platform, Quasar Markets. Uses all sorts of AI to give you the best signal available based on all of the different things that are going on in the world, and lets you compete with the big boys. So, Steven, thanks for your time for Quasar Markets, and we'll see you next week, bud. Always great having you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Hank.
Cheers. All right, gang, we're taking a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we return, we're going to be back for our second hour with more of today's top stories and a special guest who's going to help us break them all down. So stay tuned. More RoxomTV News coming your way right after this quick break.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. I want to give a quick moment to recap what we've covered so far in the first hour of today's show before we dive into our second hour. First, we spent a lot of time this morning in Minneapolis, where the fatal shooting of ICU nurse Alex Preddy during a federal immigration operation has triggered a major legal and political showdown involving the courts, state leaders, and the White House. We looked at the growing gap between official accounts and video evidence, the lawsuits and investigations now underway, and the broader questions this raises about enforcement tactics, accountability, and federal authority in local communities. And then we headed to Colombia, where the country's second largest pension fund is preparing to offer limited Bitcoin exposure to select retirement clients. And we talked about why this is a meaningful signal for institutional adoption, how cautiously these funds are approaching crypto, and what it says about Bitcoin's growing role in long-term investment strategy. Now, let's get started with the top story of today's second hour. Now, our top story this hour is playing... Thank you, Stinger. So our top story from this second hour is playing out inside government offices in Caracas and inside prisons scattered across Venezuela, where families are trying to figure out who is actually being released. The Venezuelan government says it has recently released hundreds of detainees, and human rights groups say the real number appears to be much lower. Interim President Delcy Rodriguez claims that 626 people have been freed as part of an ongoing release process, though she has not provided a detailed timeline. She also says she plans to meet with the United Nations Human Rights Chief to request international verification of the government's lists. Now, on the surface, that sounds like transparency, but watchdog groups, well, they're remaining skeptical. Venezuela's leading human rights organization, Foro Penal, says it has only been able to independently confirm the release of 104 political prisoners since Sunday. Its director, Alfredo Romero, says detainees have been freed from prisons across the country, but without official lists, families are often left guessing. He argues that publishing verified records would help restore credibility. Now, Foro Penal has previously documented about 150 releases since early January, again falling well below government claims. This gap has become a bit of a reoccurring pattern. All of this is happening under heightened international pressure. Earlier this month, U.S. authorities captured President Nicolas Maduro, which renewed diplomatic efforts to push Caracas toward political reforms. Now, analysts say the releases may be aimed at easing sanctions and rebuilding relations with Western governments. Or in practical terms, it may be an attempt to show progress without fully changing the system. Human rights groups warn that without independent verification, it remains unclear how many political prisoners remain behind bars. And without reliable data, accountability becomes difficult. And why this matters for our audiences at home is that human rights conditions influence sanctions, foreign aid, migration flows, and diplomatic relationships that directly affect global stability. And right now, trust in official statements remains very limited. Our next story takes place in Brussels, where the European Commission has opened an investigation into X and its AI chatbot Grok over the spread of sexualized AI-generated images. Regulators are examining whether the company complied with the European Union's Digital Services Act, which requires large platforms to reduce risks tied to harmful content. Officials want to know whether X properly assessed these risks before deploying the technology at scale. Earlier this month, the Commission described the images as unlawful and appalling, which signaled that regulators view this as a serious failure, not a minor glitch. And my prompter is frozen. All right, we're having some technical difficulties here, but I just got rid of him. So now the investigators, sorry gang, this is a live show, and there we go. So now the investigators will review the company's internal controls, governance systems, and response procedures. They are looking at how quickly the platform reacted, what safeguards were in place, and whether those safeguards were sufficient. So far, X has not offered a detailed public response, and European officials have also been cautious about releasing specific timelines for the probe. Now, this case adds to growing pressure on Elon Musk companies in Europe, where regulators have taken a tougher stance on technological oversight. Lawmakers argue that AI systems reaching hundreds of millions of users must meet high safety and transparency standards. In their view, scale brings responsibility, and the outcome of this investigation could shape how generative AI is regulated across the European Union. It may also influence rules in other countries that often look to Europe as a policy model. Now, why this matters for viewers at home is that European regulations frequently affect how global tech companies design products for everyone, and this case could help determine how AI tools behave on social platforms for years to come. And our next story, in the U.S., Citigroup is preparing to cut more jobs in March following roughly 1,000 layoffs earlier this year. The move is part of CEO Jane Frazier's long-running effort to streamline the bank and improve profitability. Now, according to sources familiar with the plans, the cuts will largely affect managing directors and other senior employees. Some executives are already being reassigned ahead of the reductions, and the layoffs are expected to be announced after annual bonuses are paid. Now, that timing is not accidental, it's common in finance actually, and Citi has been undergoing a multi-year restructuring aimed at reducing costs, flattening management layers, and fixing long-standing regulatory problems. Now, since 2022, the bank's workforce has fallen from about 240,000 employees to roughly 226,000. Executives have indicated that headcount will continue shrinking through 2026, and the company has not commented directly on this latest round. But it has pointed to earlier remarks from Chief Financial Officer Mark Mason, who said staff levels would decline as expenses are reviewed. These moves follow earlier restructurings and asset sales, and they are happening even as Citi's share price performed strongly in 2025. Now that shows management is prioritizing long-term efficiency over short-term comfort. Or in practical terms, Fraser is trying to make Citi leaner and more competitive with rivals. But that transformation comes at a human cost. Now, why this should matter to our audiences at home is that large bank restructurings often reflect deeper shifts in how finance operates. They influence credit availability, lending standards, and job stability across the economy. And they signal that even major institutions are still adapting to a changing financial landscape. All right, joining me to talk about this story and others in our second hour of today's show is the CIO over at LatAm and good friend of the program, John Glover. John, happy Monday. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, Hank. How you doing? Good to see you.
Likewise, great to see you too. We're having a fun day today. We're at our mobile studio, so we appreciate you joining us. We're doing my best here. I think I saw my cat eating that plant, so if he comes back in the frame, just don't pay him any mind. But I'm excited to have you here and talk to you, John, and I want to get into the Citi story because it looks like Citi's cutting more jobs even after a strong year for its stock. So is this really about financial trouble, John, or is this just how big banks operate right now in a tighter, more competitive world? What's your initial beat on this story?
I think it's a multitude of things. So, I've been in banking, not for the last 5 years, but been in banking for the last 35 years prior to that, and very cyclical kind of hiring, firing policies of the banks. It's usually when a new CEO comes in place, like Jane Fraser, they need to make their mark, and so they target either growth or they target expenses. She's come in and targeted expenses because it was at a time during great growth anyhow. And so I think that this is her trying to make her mark on the bank and fulfilling promises she made to become the CEO. But I think on top of that, we do have some cyclical issues going on in the financial marketplace as it stands. We're seeing concerns start to come in with the president of the United States being a little bit, what's the right word? So I don't offend any Trump supporters. A little bit difficult to have a lot of confidence in the stability of the financial markets in the U.S. And so it just makes some sense to try and hone in expenses if you do think there's going to be a downturn in the capital markets and in the investment banking revenues that they're used to earning. And we are seeing a lot of people that are starting to move away from U.S. bank issuance. Even the U.S. banks are saying that they're moving away from investments in U.S. bank or U.S. market assets. So it makes some sense to start shoring things up at the institution.
Yeah, you make some great points there, John. We've seen a lot of instability over the last year and maybe now more than ever. So it's not surprising that you're probably going to hear a lot of stakeholders and shareholders are always get a little excited over the idea of hearing the phrase cost cutting. But when layoffs start hitting senior managers and executives alike, John, what does that tell you about how serious this restructuring really is? Does it matter that it's hitting a lot of these senior managers, executives? What beat or feel is that giving you right now?
Yeah, it sort of strengthens my second point that they're really concerned that we are going to start seeing a downturn. And so they want to get rid of very expensive people. There's also when you want to cut and make a big difference, you cutting 500 low salaried employees versus cutting 500 high salary employees makes a hell of a difference. And so once these bonuses are paid, they cut these people out. These are people who are making, base salaries of $300,000, $400,000 a year. Plus the bonuses. So it makes some sense to be cutting those if you really want to have an impact.
Yeah. And it definitely begs the question here, John, like for those people watching it at home who maybe work in finance or banking, should this situation maybe be seen as kind of a canary in the coal mine for the whole industry? Or is Citi maybe more of a special case here? Is this something you think that people might be worth their time to extrapolate out? This might be kind of what's coming around the bend, or what do you make of this? Is this just a one-off?
I always think banks are good indicators of what's going to happen in the markets overall. because they see all the flows, they see all of their books of business and whether it's growing or shrinking. So to see a bank like Citibank, who's not only an investment bank but a retail bank, start to really worry about cost cutting, I think that is an indication that things are starting to turn south.
Yikes. And long term, John, do you feel that cuts like this actually make banks stronger, or do they maybe even risk hollowing out talent and hurting some performance down the road?
I don't think that it makes them more risky, or is an indication that they're going to be weaker down the road. The reason I say that is banks are fairly fat to start with. They've always had, in my opinion, far too many managers and not enough producers. And so, honing some of that fat is not a bad thing to do. My bigger concern is that with AI, the junior people who are coming into banks have been replaced. And so you lose that 3, 4, 5 years of experience before these people become, middle managers and more senior managers. And that talent is just not there now, because banks just aren't hiring them; they're replacing them. So a longer term concern I would have is that you won't have senior managers that have the experience they need. But getting rid of senior managers today, I don't think is a big deal.
That's a great point. I didn't think about that. If you have AI replacing all these entry-level jobs, like what do you think that does to the talent pipeline down the line? Because then you don't have those people that need that experience initially before they become these senior managers. Do you think that's something that could have some maybe effects on the industry we're not fully thinking about right now? Because without that experience, like how do people get that experience, right?
Exactly true. And I don't think that's just the financial markets. I think that's every industry that's taking advantage of AI. And I fully understand why they should. We use AI. It's a great tool to have. But you still have to bring junior people along, give them the experience they need. So you do have that pipeline of middle managers and senior managers down the road. And I think a lot of firms are not thinking that way at all.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you brought up. I'd be really curious to see what firms do that, because at some point that is going to be an obstacle they're going to encounter. And how do you combat that going forward if AI is just taking all of those jobs? I don't know what the answer is, but I guess that's another problem that we're probably going to be relying on AI to solve at some point. So we'll see how that plays out. All right, we're going to move on to our next story, John. So hang 10, I'll be back with you in just a second. Because if you're out there and you're watching global markets over the last couple of days, from Wall Street to Asia to Europe, you probably noticed that one asset is moving almost straight up, and that asset is gold. You see, gold prices have surged to fresh record highs, breaking above $5,100 an ounce as investors rush towards safety. Spot gold climbed as much as 2% to hit an all-time peak above $5,110, and U.S. futures followed right along. And this is already one of the strongest gold rallies we've seen in decades. Analysts say the move reflects growing anxiety about geopolitics, trade policy, and the overall direction of the United States economy. Many investors are uneasy about shifting signals from Washington and weakening confidence in traditional financial assets. Last year alone, gold gained more than 60%, its biggest annual jump since the late 1970s. That surge was driven by heavy central bank buying, strong investor inflows, and expectations that interest rates may eventually come down. China has been purchasing gold for more than a year straight now, and exchange-traded funds have seen record inflows. And recent swings in U.S. trade policy, including shifting tariff threats tied to Greenland and Canada, have reinforced gold's reputation as political insurance. A weaker U.S. dollar has added fuel to the rally, and when the dollar falls, gold becomes cheaper for overseas buyers. At the same time, many investors have been trimming dollar exposure ahead of key Federal Reserve decisions. Some analysts describe the surge as a broader crisis of confidence in leadership and policy stability. Others see it as a return to hard assets in an uncertain world. Several major banks now project prices could reach between $5,500 and $6,000 later this year. Other metals are rising too. Silver has hit records, platinum and palladium are climbing, and tight supply and speculative buying are amplifying the move. Now, while short-term pullbacks are possible, most analysts expect buyers to return quickly. Now, why this matters for those of you at home is that rising gold prices often signal deeper economic anxiety. And when investors worldwide start choosing metal over money, it reflects concern about where the system is heading. We're bringing John back. John, We got gold breaking record highs. Is that usually a sign that investors are scared or that they see something specific coming economically? What's your beat on the giant rise in gold we've seen over the last year up and through now?
Well, traditionally, gold has been the hedge against inflation. And I think the beginning of this 60% rise that we saw in 2025 was inflation-based because people were seeing more inflation come in. Trump's tariffs were definitely inflationary, even though he'll say that they're not because they're paid by foreigners, which doesn't make any sense. But so that it started with inflation hedging. And then when you see things like a NATO partner threatening another NATO country, then you get a lot of geopolitical anxiety. And so a flight to safety is something that would be natural in the markets. But when you have a flight to safety, traditionally, those safe haven assets are US dollar, US T-bills and bonds, gold, and Swiss franc. So a bunch of those are not assets that people would move into. No one's moving into US dollar right now because of everything that's going on in the US. No one's moving into bills and bonds. As a matter of fact, one of the EU leaders, who's a leader of a NATO country, said, we will consider selling all of our US T-bills. And Europe owns 40% of all US debt. So, if Europe decides to sell off their US debt because they don't want to be holding debt of a country that's threatening them, that will destroy the prices of bills and bonds, drive up interest rates for Americans. So, when you look at those, it's not surprising that the asset that's able to absorb all of this safe haven flow is gold, and that will continue. And I agree with your last statement you made that any short-term pullbacks will be just that, because people are going to continue jumping into gold. So, as the US dollar falls, gold becomes cheaper to non-Americans. And as US rhetoric continues to build about, invading or threatening tariffs on allied countries, there's no doubt that gold's going to continue firing to the top side.
Yeah, no, we've definitely seen a lot of people move their money into the shiny objects since all the instability we've seen during the last year. Now is certainly no change from that. It does beg the question, though. You and I both know that Bitcoin is digital gold. It is the digital hedge against inflation, yet we've seen Bitcoin pull back from all-time highs in October of 126 to now we're in the high 80s. Why do you think that is? Are people still not ready to officially call Bitcoin the digital gold hedge against inflation? Like, why are we seeing gold explode like we have, but Bitcoin has drawn back about 30% in the last couple of months? Why do you think that is? Are we just not there quite yet?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting conundrum, and one that I've been kind of struggling with. Bitcoin is digital gold. Bitcoin does have that same scarcity element, but what it doesn't have yet is hugely widespread adoption from all people in senior levels of government, all people on the retail side, because we've seen like retail flows into Bitcoin have been really, really slow over the past month and a half, 2 months. The only real purchasers of Bitcoin lately have been, people like Strategy, et cetera. Bitcoin will come back, but right now, I think when it comes to safe haven flow, people just go to what they know, and what they know is gold, and they know gold is that safe haven flow. So, when they looked at Bitcoin, a lot of people were talking about that as digital gold from an inflationary hedge perspective, because governments couldn't deflate the value of Bitcoin. So I think that there's still that kind of mindset that it's an inflation hedge as opposed to a safe haven asset, and it will get there. I think it's just delayed.
Yeah, I think you're right. I sometimes forget, like, we've only had Bitcoin for 16, 17 years, and gold has been around for thousands. And just because you and I know the properties of Bitcoin that make it so similar yet more efficient and better than gold, I'm like, why wouldn't everybody be buying Bitcoin yet? But we're still so early in that journey, and oftentimes I have to remind myself of that as well, even though you and I know it is the far superior hard asset. So I got to give it time. And as I know, we all have to be patient in the Bitcoin space. All right, we need everyone. Go ahead, real quick.
Value of gold going up so high and Bitcoin not following is going to draw people into Bitcoin who want that safe haven, and they go, hang on, gold's way up, Bitcoin's not. Why is that correlation not in? Start flowing into it. So it'll come. It'll take another couple months.
And we've often seen Bitcoin lag behind gold a little bit, 3 to 6 months. So once that catches up, I think we're going to be primed for that next explosive Bitcoin leg up that we've all been waiting for. But 2026, only time will tell. And we're going to take a quick break here at Roxom TV News. And when we're back, John and I are going to be discussing our top Bitcoin stories of the hour. You won't want to miss it, so stay tuned. More Roxom TV News coming your way after this really quick commercial break. See you in just a sec. Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card, buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee. And right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. All right, gang, so we're back and we are with our first of our two Bitcoin stories of the hour. So let's get into it, because this one takes us to Washington, D.C., where two of the most powerful financial regulators in the country are preparing to appear together in public, something that has historically been rare in the world of crypto oversight. You see, the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission have originally scheduled a joint public meeting on cryptocurrency policy for this Tuesday, January 27th. Now, the meeting has now been rescheduled to Thursday, January 29th, and the event will take place at the CFTC's headquarters, will be open to the public, and will be live streamed on both agencies' websites. Now, that level of transparency is notable, especially given the long history of rivalry and jurisdictional disputes between these two regulators. Now, for years, the SEC and CFTC have competed over who should regulate different parts of the crypto industry, often creating confusion for companies and investors alike. Now, they're showing up together with the stated goal of coordinating oversight and reducing that uncertainty. Or in simpler terms, they are trying to clarify who is responsible for what and how enforcement will actually work. Both agencies have framed this meeting as part of a broader effort to support President Trump's stated goal of making the United States the global center for cryptocurrency innovation. That message was reinforced earlier this week when Trump addressed global leaders at the World Economic Forum in Davos and emphasized his desire to keep America at the forefront of digital asset development. He argued that strong crypto leadership could help unlock new paths to financial freedom for Americans. While Bitcoin's price has been relatively flat in recent days, the policy signal behind this meeting is quite significant. Top regulators appearing together with clear political backing suggests a shift away from fragmentation and toward coordination. Now, historically, U.S. crypto policy has been inconsistent, unpredictable, and at times openly hostile. This moment, however, it looks different. It suggests an attempt to create clearer rules, more stable oversight, and a more supportive environment for responsible innovation. Now, why this should matter to those of you at home is that regulatory clarity directly affects where companies choose to invest, where jobs are created, and how safely consumers can participate in new financial technologies. And when agencies cooperate instead of clash, it reduces uncertainty across the entire system. And over time, that stability tends to support sustainable growth. We're bringing John back. John, the SEC and CFTC are showing up together, and it's pretty rare. Does this feel like real coordination to you, or more like a symbolic gesture? What's your read on this situation?
Listen, I think this is fantastic. One of the biggest challenges that we've had in our business, and I know other people who are founders of other companies within the digital asset space, have just not had any clarity as to how the U.S. is going to treat this from a regulatory perspective. So if you look at where all these companies are, we're a Cayman Islands company. Tether's moved to El Salvador. You know, we've had all of these big companies who are creating lots of jobs, creating lots of wealth for people, have not been in the U.S. because they just haven't been certain what's going on. And so, you know, when you don't have clarity, you don't make long-term decisions. And so if they can provide some clarity, especially the two organizations working together, because I tell you, in the last 35 years of me being involved in finance, they have not worked together very often. They're always clashing. So I think this is a really positive step forward for the industry.
Yeah, I think, the markets are waiting for it, waiting for stability on the geopolitical front. We're looking for clarity on the rules and regulations, specifically with regards to crypto, and it appears that we might finally be getting it. And on top of that, we've got political backing from the White House. So my question for you, John, is how much more likely is it that we actually get clear, workable rules this time, especially when we're getting support from the big house themselves in regards to this? Is this making you feel inspired about where we're going to be headed in 2026, and we're finally going to get some clear rules and regulations that will hopefully benefit the whole industry? Are you as hopeful as I am?
I'm hopeful. Am I expecting that it's going to be 100% clear and there's not going to be any changes going forward? We know the White House likes to flip-flop on a lot of different decisions that they make and that they give. So hopefully we'll see this. This is the same president who put Powell in place and said he was fantastic, and now he wants to get rid of the guy. So who knows? We'll see what the SEC and the CFTC say and do. But if they toe his line, then I think we're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, certainly still some question marks at play, but it appears that we're trending in the right direction. And John, from an investor's point of view here, how important is regulatory clarity compared to things maybe like price and technology? Where is it on that hierarchy in terms of what investors are looking for right now?
Oh, I think it's very high. Price is always the most kind of driving factor, but when it becomes long-term investors, so when you're looking at pension funds and insurance companies who all look very long-term, if they don't have regulatory clarity, they do not get involved, and they just can't afford to. So I think this is a really positive thing for the large investor. I don't think it means a whole lot to the retail investor. But for the large investor who are looking at putting up funding for new companies who are doing funding rounds, for investing in their own businesses, like the banks investing in the businesses in the US on the digital side, this is absolutely critical for them to make those decisions. So I think this is going to be huge if it comes out, the way we're hoping, with a lot of clarity.
Yeah, and you made an interesting point that kind of caught my ear here, John. You said this might not mean a lot to the retail investor, but it likely means a lot to big institutional investors. At what point do you think does something actually start meaning things to retail again? Because it looks like retail and institution kind of look at things a little differently. Is retail looking for more signs of potential hype and upside, while institutions are really the ones looking for clarity and real rules around the space? Do they kind of operate a little differently in terms of what's going to incentivize them to invest? Can you maybe break down how you think those are different?
I think there's two aspects to retail. Like we use retail as this catch-all of these, individuals who are purchasing or may purchase Bitcoin. But when you look early and understand Bitcoin are very speculative in nature, they're the ones who buy meme coins and jump in and out of Reddit threads. And then there's the your mom, my sister, people who just are not involved in this stuff at all, who, until it becomes absolutely common to be invest into something like digital assets, they're not going to jump in. And so when the institutions get involved, when the banks start offering spot Bitcoin products as opposed to just the ETF based products, when you see Bitcoin price as a daily feature on news that you read in traditional news media, just like they give the currency price, or they give the price of Apple stock, when they start reporting on Bitcoin price, things like that, that's what brings in that second set of the retail investor that I was talking about. And that's when we start seeing those flows come back up again. And so I don't even think it's hype. I just think it's awareness, it's being commonplace. And so when things are commonplace, they're not risky anymore, right? So I think that's when we'll see the retail get back involved in a bigger way.
That makes a lot of sense. And from your seat at the table at LatAm, John, what kind of clarification and rules are you really looking for to feel like we are entering into this new era where Bitcoin is no longer this fringe asset, but an intricate part of the entire financial ecosystem? Are there any things that you and the team over there are really keeping your eye on right now?
There are a few things. So when we look at regulators, we're not talking just about Bitcoin, but about digital assets as a whole. And when you dial back the clock about 3 years ago, we used to have something called stablecoin growth accounts, where people could put USDC or USDT with lending and earn a yield. And the way we earned that yield for them was lending to retail clients over collateralized like we do today. So very, very low risk. We had to stop offering that to Americans because the SEC decided that that activity was a security. And since we don't have a securities license, we couldn't do that anymore. So what the SEC did was prevent hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment that were coming from retail, because we had, I think at the time, we had about 350 million in those accounts that all came from retail investors. It prevented them from earning that very, very safe yield. So for us, we'd love to see clarity on that front so we can offer those products again to our client base. Back then we were paying 11% to people when, the risk-free rate was 2, I think, or 1.
Oh, wow.
So it was a great way for people to build wealth, which is exactly what Trump said he wants to be able to offer to Americans. So we're looking closely at things like that we can offer those products again into the U.S.
I love that. And do you feel like this meeting between the CFTC and the SEC could actually, maybe if we look back, could mark the moment that the United States really truly became more crypto friendly long term? Or are we still kind of in a place of flux right now where we're just waiting we really need concrete stuff before we can say like the page has been turned on the next part of Bitcoin and crypto's evolution? Like, how big of a deal do you think this will be when we look back, 5 years from now, this meeting between the SEC and CFTC?
These are all really important steps to widespread adoption and to making the U.S. a true leader in the digital asset space and the Bitcoin space. So, the first one was the approval of the ETFs back in 2023. Was it 2023?
Right.
2024. And, this is another incremental step that we are getting clarity on what is allowed in the U.S. And with the CFTC and the SEC coming out this week, that's going to be another super important step as long as there is clarity and people know where we're going. So I think we'll look back at all of those as being incremental, super important events that took place to put this back into the common man's hand.
Yeah, and we've just had the opportunity now to talk about the SEC, the CFTC. I want to talk about another really important player in this space, which of course is BlackRock, in our next story here. So stay tuned, John. I'm going to be back with you in just a minute, because this next story begins inside BlackRock's headquarters and stretches outward through Wall Street, retirement accounts, and the global Bitcoin market. Because what happens inside the world's largest asset manager tends to ripple everywhere. You see, BlackRock has filed for a new product called the iShares Bitcoin Premium Income ETF, signaling that the company is continuing to move deeper into Bitcoin markets in a very deliberate and calculated way. The new fund is designed to combine direct Bitcoin exposure with income generation, most likely by using option strategies layered on top of its existing Bitcoin ETF infrastructure. Or, in practical terms, that means investors would not only track the price of Bitcoin, but could also receive regular income along the way. Now, this growing confidence is largely driven by the explosive success of Bitcoin's flagship spot Bitcoin ETF, known as IBIT, which has become one of the fastest growing exchange-traded funds in financial history since its launch. Now, within a remarkably short period of time, IBIT has become one of BlackRock's most successful product launches ever, both in terms of speed and profitability. The scale of that success is kind of difficult to overstate. IBIT now manages well over 700,000 Bitcoin, with most estimates placing the figure somewhere between 780,000 and 800,000 BTC. That represents roughly 3 to 4% of Bitcoin's entire fixed supply, meaning this single fund now holds more Bitcoin than most corporations and rivals, many long-standing crypto whales. Or in other words, BlackRock has quietly become one of the largest Bitcoin holders on the planet. And by filing for this new premium income ETF, the company is making it clear that it is no longer treating Bitcoin as a niche experiment, but as a permanent part of its long-term product strategy. On Wall Street, the conversation, it's shifted quite noticeably. The debate is no longer about whether Bitcoin belongs in portfolios. Instead, it's about how investors want to access it, whether through pure exposure, income-focused strategies, or a blend of both. BlackRock is positioning itself to offer every one of those options. And why this should matter to those of you in our audience at home is that when the world's largest money manager builds layered, sophisticated Bitcoin products, it signals long-term institutional commitment rather than short-term speculation. This is not about chasing trends. It's about building financial infrastructure that is designed to last. We're bringing John back. John, when the world's largest asset manager starts building more advanced Bitcoin products, how big of a signal is that for you in regards to the future of crypto investing? Seems like a pretty big one, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, it's in line with what we were talking about before, Hank. And as the banks get more and more involved in this and offer more and more products, it becomes more and more commonplace and people invest more into Bitcoin. So I think it's a really positive step. What they're offering is not, it's not kind of earth shattering. It's a covered call strategy, which has been in existence in financial markets forever. We do the same thing. We offer the same product here at LatAm, but they're offering it in an ETF format. So it's going to be, people can hold it within their registered retirement plans, et cetera, which is fantastic. And it's what it will do. It will dampen the volatility of Bitcoin a little bit, which again is a positive thing because dampened volatility means that people aren't afraid to invest in Bitcoin because they're not as worried about the downside. So all in all, this is a very positive step. And I'm sure that this will be a very, very popular ETF. You don't have the same uncapped exposure to Bitcoin as you do with the regular IBIT. Because it is going to be capped because they're earning that yield by selling calls on Bitcoin, which means you're forced to sell the Bitcoin at certain levels. But I think it's really, really positive.
Yeah, definitely. And, we have this new ETF combines Bitcoin exposure with income strategies. So my question for you, John, is who do you think this is really aimed at? Is this more for younger crypto investors or maybe more for traditional retirement money? Who do you see this product, benefiting?
I think it's just another product to offer out to the marketplace. And it's a product that allows you to have an income stream. So, you think of it more along the lines of kind of fixed income returns as opposed to just pure exposure, which you've got in the IBIT stock or the IBIT ETF. So, more sophisticated investors will probably get involved in this because they'll understand it better. One of the things over the years that I've found, and I was an options trader for a long, long time in traditional finance, people are afraid of options and derivatives because they just go, well, I can't possibly understand them, so I don't want to get involved. So it'll probably be slightly more sophisticated investors that go into that. And it'll also be those who want to earn yield while Bitcoin is playing in these, these kind of muted ranges as we have been for, since the beginning of November almost.
Yeah. Not a lot of price action, a lot of sideways trading we've seen since the big crash we had in October. And, it does bring a question, though, to my mind. We have BlackRock. They hold 3 to 4% of all Bitcoin. And I believe Strategy is not too far behind them and with their holdings currently. And you mentioned you feel like that's going to kind of mitigate some of the volatility we're going to see in the market. That might be true, but does that in any way kind of go against the ethos of Bitcoin to begin with, that we're having this much of it centralized by two big players? Or does the fact that we have two players that own 3 to 4% not really that much of a big deal when you look at the greater landscape of Bitcoin? Or could that be problematic? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
It could be problematic in some instances in that I don't think the BlackRock ETF is going to make a difference on that. But Strategy and other Bitcoin treasury companies, I do worry about them because I worry if Bitcoin continues to sell off, what happens if they're forced to sell some of their Bitcoin in order to satisfy investors? Then that could exacerbate the situation. IBIT, if people get upset that they're losing money because they're in IBIT and it keeps going down because Bitcoin prices are going down, that could happen. But I don't think it's going to incite volatility. Whereas I think for the Bitcoin treasury companies, that is a risk. The concentration is inevitable in any market. You see people that will take advantage of that and just start buying this up. But as long as we're in a situation where we're still mining more Bitcoin, I'm not as concerned. I get more concerned once Bitcoin is almost fully mined. What happens then if you've got concentration in a few hands? That's
a good point. And BlackRock is kind of I always think of it as like the evil empire of the financial world, right? Like they're not doing anything to chase hype. They're doing it because it makes sense. So when you have BlackRock being one of the largest Bitcoin holders in the entire world, why do you think more people aren't waking up to what a big deal that is? Like, again, if BlackRock is into this, they're doing it because it works and it makes them money. Why aren't more traditional investors, you feel like, paying attention to this? Because to me, that kind of tells the tale of the tape. Bitcoin's not going anywhere. The evil empire is involved, and they're clearly doing it because it benefits them. Why do you think people are ignoring this? Because it's huge. It's been huge.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Hank. I'm not sure. I think there is still, the Bitcoin maxis still hate any kind of TradFi institution, so they don't like it, I suppose.
Right.
But it is interesting to me that the retail investor is not more involved in that. I mean, obviously, it's been huge. It's been the biggest ETF issuance ever. So they are heavily involved. But, still, when you look at how many U.S. citizens hold Bitcoin, it's still relatively low on the grand scheme of things when you compare it to, the fact that they've got pension plans that are holding, their pension fund monies and all sorts of different things. So it'll come. I know that some of the traditional investment companies are very slow. I was talking to a big asset manager in Canada last week, and I said, "Are you telling your investors that they should be holding Bitcoin or digital assets as part of their portfolio?" And they said, "Not yet. We've got to wait and see how many more big companies do that first before we jump in." So I think there is a little bit of that wait and see. But things like this BlackRock, as more and more of these banks and asset managers get involved, it's going to bring the smaller ones in, and then it'll be a kind of a cascading effect.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And we're really seeing that wait and see approach from so many. Like, I keep wondering, like, when is the tipping point? It wasn't BlackRock. Are we essentially just waiting for the United States to eventually come out and say, hey, we're going to actively start finding ways to acquire Bitcoin, to put in the Bitcoin strategic reserve, and then it kind of gives, John Q. Public permission to look at Bitcoin as a hedge and not this speculative asset that a lot of people still look at as it today? I don't know. But I would like to know from you and the team at LatAm, what are you guys anticipating for the rest of 2026? What are you telling your clients right now? I know you guys do amazing work over there. You have tons of amazing Bitcoin related products everywhere already. We'd love to know what to expect from you and the LatAm team as we make our way into 2026. I think it's going to be a good one for Bitcoin, so I'm getting the feeling it's going to be a great one from LatAm. What can we expect from you guys this year?
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting year. We've got an announcement we're going to be making in the next couple of weeks, so I can't preempt that now, but it's going to be a very positive announcement for the digital asset space and for our clients. I think what the result of all this will be is we'll keep seeing lending rates in the Bitcoin-backed lending space compress, which is great for the retail borrower. We are seeing more competition come into the space, which I think is actually a really positive thing. I do worry somewhat still about the DeFi, because there's lots of DeFi money coming into this space, and you just get a little concerned that they're lending below risk-free rates, and so where's that money coming from, or is this just another accident waiting to happen? But for the most part, I think this year is going to be a really positive year for Bitcoin, very positive year for LatAm, and we're going to be announcing a bunch of, in addition to this big announcement I'm talking about, we're going to be announcing a bunch of upgrades to our platform as well that I think people are going to really like. So yeah, all in all, I'm very excited about Bitcoin in 2026. I think it's going to be a great year.
Amazing. And you better come back on the show when you have that announcement, because we want to be able here to break it here first on RoxomTV News, because we love the work you and the team are doing over there. And we always love having you on the show, John. You're always bringing the heat, and we appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise with us. I'm sure you've gained at least a couple new fans from our audience today that are saying, listen, I need more John Glover in my life. So for those of them out there that just haven't had enough yet, what's the best place I can send them to learn more about you, maybe hot takes you have on Twitter or somewhere else, and where they can find out more about all the amazing services you and the team at LatAm are providing your clients?
Yeah, you can reach out to us at LatAm.io. I'm on Twitter as well, and I put out a weekly piece on my view on Bitcoin and where it's going. Yeah, there's a lot of ways that you can contact us, but we would love to get in contact. We're really happy to talk to clients and potential clients, and love being on the show. It's been great, Hank. Thank you very much.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine, John. Thank you so much for joining us again. It's always a blast when we can get you on board and get to pick your brain a little bit about what the industry is doing and where you think it's heading. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we can't wait to have you back on the show again really soon. And have a great week, my friend. It's only Monday, so we got a lot in store for us.
Thank you. We're digging out here in Canada. See you later.
Thanks, John. We'll see you next time. All right, gang, that is a wrap for our Monday edition here at Roxom TV News. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and joining us. Tomorrow, we'll be back on at our normal time of 8 a.m. Pacific to 10 a.m. Pacific time. So make sure to check us out then. And if you haven't already, just do me the thing. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, and me at Hank at Roxom TV, wherever you choose to do your doom scrolling. And we'll be back tomorrow again at our 8 a.m. time, right here at Roxom TV News, breaking down all of the day's top stories for your enjoyment and viewing pleasure. So thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in on this Monday, and we will see you tomorrow for our Tuesday edition here at Roxom TV News. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and always be sure to huddle on. See you tomorrow, gang.